everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Think On It. And we are so excited to be here with you again today. And the Think On It podcast brought to you by Faircreek Church, and really what we are here for and what this is all about. The Think On It podcast is to help you thrive in your faith. And we hope that we're doing that. And we hope that we are able to provide some additional information and some helpful resources to help you continue to grow and to continue to thrive in your relationship with Jesus. We are your hosts. This is Grayson.
Hey.
And I am Matt. And we're just really excited to be back with you today.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And we are wrapping up a 5-part series on the spiritual journey. And today we're talking about something that's really normal for a bunch of people. Everyone really has this in their life, which is a season of wilderness.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think a lot of times in churches, we act like the wilderness is this big surprise and it shouldn't be happening. But we're here to say that it's really normal and you can expect this to happen. You've probably already gone through something like this.
Yeah.
And hopefully, you know, we can help you go through the next one in a better way.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that's become really clear to me through the series that we did and just the kind of studying and the working through this whole, all of the stages, phases and stuff, but specifically the wilderness is, and maybe you've experienced this if you're watching or listening, a lot of times within a church context, the wilderness is treated like you said, either some big surprise or maybe even like it is a deviation from the path, the journey, right? And so when you hit a wilderness, when you hit an experience where you're going through a hard time, it's treated like, okay, you are off the desired path. You are not on the journey the way you're supposed to be. So let's course correct. Let's figure out how to get back onto the correct journey. And a lot of times when you treat it that way, there just isn't a good plan for how to help a person in that situation. It's just more like, well, once you get things figured out, we'll be here to help you.
Yeah,
and we want to change.
Pattern.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And we want to change that. We want to change that perception of this stage in a person's development.
Yeah, and kind of provide some context as to things that are going on. And really, when you're in the wilderness, like, think about it. If I was like out in the middle of Australia and the outback and like just like in the wilderness, like I'm going to need a guide to get me out of that.
Yeah, exactly.
And the same thing with the spiritual wilderness. You need a guide, you need people around you to be able to get through that.
For sure.
So we kind of want to define what the wilderness is and then kind of walk through what that looks like, how to get out, how to think about it, maybe reframe some things. But first to start, the wilderness is really about your faith and you're rediscovering God in this. And we'll talk a little bit about how a lot of times it's reconstructing your faith in a lot of ways. The wilderness is often brought on by some pivotal circumstances in your life, a life crisis, a faith crisis. There's a loss of certainties. Maybe it's a divorce. Maybe it's, you lost your, 7-figure job. I don't know who has a 7-figure job. Let's be friends.
Somebody. Yeah, right.
But, and a lot of times the spiritual side of things is there's a lot of doubts. There's a lot of questions. Often there's a lot of feeling abandoned by God.
Yeah.
It's also called the journey inward.
Right.
Could you speak to it being a journey inward?
Yeah, so what we mean by this is because we sort of already talked about how you have this inward focused journey, and not necessarily in a negative way, when you're going through the explore, the build, and the own stages, where it's you're trying to figure things out, right? And that's why it's sort of considered journey inward. And then we talk about the thrive stage as being that journey outward and being the expression of all the stuff that you've learned and done. Now you've got this journey back outward. You're being more focused on others. When we say that the wilderness stage is very much the journey inward, again, we don't mean that in a nasty or negative or selfish sort of way. What we mean by that is you're reevaluating maybe some presuppositions that you've had or things that you've always thought that now don't seem to work out, or whatever the case may be, especially specifically in a faith context. And so you're kind of retreating back into yourself in order to evaluate and determine if the things that you've always believed are actually true, and all of that kind of stuff. So there's definitely a journey inward from the standpoint of you're maybe rediscovering and really trying to refigure out some things, and maybe get rid of anything that you feel like doesn't really belong there, doesn't need to be there.
Yeah. And that journey can, lead you a number of places, right? You could come out on the other side of a wilderness and be thriving and have this outpouring, overflowing relationship with God. There's also the possibility that you go through this wilderness and you just get plopped back and explore or build.
Yeah.
And you're not really thriving, but you've gotten through the wilderness.
Yeah.
And hopefully you've learned some lessons along the way for how to rebuild well and how to own well and how to explore well, based off of the, experience you've had in the wilderness. But we also know, we've been talking about how you could get stuck in each of these stages as well.
Yeah.
We know that you could get stuck in the wilderness.
For sure.
And I think the wilderness is probably the worst place to get stuck.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And for people who are there, you probably even recognizing it's a scary place to get stuck.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily want to get stuck there. And I think that how we approach the journey in the wilderness will determine our destination, whether we get out of it or not, and where we end up when we do get out of it.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is kind of to go back to the thing that I was saying at the beginning, right? A lot of times the approach to the wilderness is there really isn't a really good plan. It's just, hey, figure that out. Either just stop being mad about whatever it is you were mad about, or just stop caring about the thing that hurts you so that it doesn't hurt you anymore.
Just pray it away.
Right. Pray it away, read enough Bible verses and it'll fix it. All of that kind of stuff. There's a lot of different things. When you treat it that way, then the destination isn't going to be thrive. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And who knows where that wilderness is going to dump you out, if it even does dump you out, because you could find yourself staying in it for a long time.
Yeah.
Especially, I think, if that's the approach you take to it.
Yeah. I know if you drove me 50 miles out into the Australian outback, I'm going to be stuck there for a long time.
Yes.
And those people that do get stuck in the wilderness, they're often really cynical, oftentimes towards their church or friends or family.
Yeah.
They just feel discouraged. They feel isolated. They often get uprooted. A lot of times people will move to try to escape their wilderness. Sometimes people will move churches or move jobs or states.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that means they're uprooting other people. Maybe they're leaving a church and they're taking a couple people with them.
Right.
Uprooted people will uproot people.
Yes.
And continue to do that.
That's true.
And it also leads to a lot of unhealthy introspection. You're thinking about all these things, but you don't have the best mindset on how you're thinking about it. So,
Sure.
It's a scary place to get stuck. It's a dangerous place for your faith to get stuck. But we want to be able to maybe frame this wilderness in a way where you could come out on the other side of that and be thriving.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
That is the goal for sure.
And there's a buzzword right now
Yes.
in kind of church culture, or people who grew up at church and they're not feeling it anymore. And the buzzword's deconstruction.
Yeah. Oh, the big forbidden. You're not allowed to talk about that. Moving on.
But and if you think about it, we really deconstruct a lot of things in America.
Sure.
It's like our new pastime. It's not baseball or football anymore. It's like we love destroying things and just leaving a mess in our wake.
Yeah.
And I first heard about this from a book called After Doubt. A.J. Swoboda writes it, and it's kind of like the book on deconstruction. It's really good. I recommend it.
Nice.
You should read it, Matt.
I should.
And he kind of frames spiritual formation, which is, really what the journey we're talking about is all about, in 3 stages. First, there's construction. And if we were putting the framework we've been using into that, we've got the explore, build, and own is construction. You've built a faith system. You have your beliefs. You have a church, all these things. Then, you hit a wilderness and you start to deconstruct some of those things. Maybe you built something up that shouldn't have been there, and now you're deconstructing that. And the dangerous thing is when you get to deconstruction and you stop there.
Yeah.
Because, if you were renovating your home and you deconstructed it,
right, yeah,
it's not going to be super livable.
Right. I mean, and some of us are really good at the demolition side of a building project. But you can't just you can't just do demolition and then be like, this is the way it's going to stay.
And the important and last step of that is reconstruction.
Yeah.
Which I think is how you get through the wilderness and end up in a place of thriving, is you deconstruct some of the things that shouldn't be there, and then you reconstruct them in a way where you're thriving, where your identity is solely rooted in God and Jesus and who he says you are.
Yeah.
So I kind of wanted to walk through some things and really show how this deconstruction and reconstruction is healthy, and it's how we get to the other side of the wilderness and a place that's thriving.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
So one of the things that often happens as a wilderness is people are confronting a past wound, maybe something from their family of origin, something that happened in college, right, that weekend you wish you could take back. So you're confronting a past wound, or you're confronting your false self. And how would you kind of define false self, Matt, and how would you kind of walk through that?
I think what you find here, honestly, at this point in the stage, right, is we build up a view of ourselves, and especially when it comes to in a faith or spiritual context, we build up a view of how we think we're doing, and somewhat understandably, based on what we know and what we are doing, our identity becomes wrapped up in the knowledge that we possess, or wrapped up in the work that we are doing. And so that starts to feed the view of self, just generally speaking, that we have. Mm-hmm. And I think when you hit a wilderness, a lot of times you're coming face to face with, okay, maybe I'm not where I thought I was. Maybe, turns out all the knowledge that I possess just isn't helping me right now where I'm at. Or maybe I thought I was doing all the right stuff, but yet I still end up facing this hardship. How could that be, right? And so we start to deconstruct, like, maybe I'm not exactly who I thought I was. Maybe I've built up a incorrect or inappropriate view of self. And I believe that this can happen on both sides of the spectrum too, right?
Definitely.
You can build up too high and lofty of a view of yourself, and you can also build too lowly of a view of yourself. It's important that we view ourselves the way God views us, which means not thinking way too much about ourselves, but not thinking too little of ourselves either. And people can build and construct a view of themselves that is incorrect on both ends of that spectrum. And so you start to deconstruct that a little bit and say, maybe I'm not as crummy as I thought I was, or maybe I'm not I'm not all that and I think I know everything, right? It can go on both sides of that. And so there comes a very important time in the stages of a person's development where they have to pull away some of that.
Yeah. And like you said, it's both sides of the coin. It's like, oh, I'm just human garbage, and I'm, the best thing since sliced bread. And,
sure.
And it's really framing, it's deconstructing those views of yourself that aren't healthy. It's deconstructing and really picking apart those wounds and how they've affected you. And then you begin to reconstruct. You begin to see those wounds or past trauma or, difficulties the way God sees them. Yeah. You start to see how God brought you through that. You start to see yourself the way God does. And that's the reconstruction that is needed here in the wilderness. And, journaling, counseling, these things are going to be able to help you through that and to bring you through the other side of the wilderness thriving.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I really like this quote from After Doubt. AJ says, "Our doubts and deconstructions can be a front for deep-seated resentment towards our parents, from hurts from church, for jealousies that others got more than us, or for the angst of unrealized dreams." And I think starting to deconstruct those things and not use deconstruction as a front for those things, but really digging into those, hurts from parents and church and the fact that life just didn't turn out the way that you thought it would.
Right.
And digging into those and starting to see things the way God does, reconstructing is going to lead you to thrive there.
Right. You'll notice that we are using the word deconstruction quite a bit, and I know that maybe depending on your background, but I know that in a lot of church contexts, maybe that Grayson, you and I are familiar with, this is kind of a word that's like, please don't bring that up. Please don't talk about it. Right.
It's a bad thing.
Sort of thing. And I think one of the main things we want to encourage people with is it's okay to be in a place where you feel like you're doing a little bit of deconstruction in terms of your faith.
Absolutely.
And in terms of just the stuff that has been added to the Christian journey that maybe isn't biblical, or maybe at the very least isn't rooted in the absolute non-negotiable core of what is required to be be a Jesus follower. It's okay to be in a place where you find yourself doing some of that. In fact, I would go as far as to suggest that just about every believer probably needs to do this at some point in their in the process. I know I needed to. Yeah. Born and raised, grew up in church, been a part of church my whole entire life, only ever wanted to be serving in ministry, went to college to prepare to do that, and started doing it, right? And yet I still found myself at a point, at one time where, because of hurt and because of being disenfranchised a little bit with, the church and some other folks, I found myself being like, it's got to be different than this, right? There's got to be something that I'm missing in this process. And I wasn't missing a personal relationship with Jesus. I had that. I wasn't missing some kind of deep-seated anger towards God. I didn't have a deep-seated anger towards God, but there was just something about the church environment and my experience within it that just wasn't adding up. And so I had to strip away some of the extra stuff that had been piled on top of my, faith of a child that just didn't belong there. And it was like, I got to get rid of some of this stuff. It's not necessary. It's not critical. And then maybe in some cases, it's not helpful. It's hurting me,
Yeah. You had constructed some things that needed to be deconstructed.
Exactly. But you can get into danger with the deconstruction absolutely. For sure too. We want to be careful about it.
Yeah. And, that's when we said earlier that like deconstruction isn't of itself bad. It's actually could be a really good thing as long as you reconstruct. If you just deconstruct and just rip apart your faith, that's not healthy. That's not what we want for you. That's not what God wants for you.
Right. You don't want to just take the wheelbarrow of, whatever faith and stuff that you have and just dump the whole thing out and say, I'm done with it. I'm dumping it all out.
Yeah.
We want to dig back down to the non-negotiable essential core. Keep those things, and then we can find a way to reconstruct.
Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
and AJ actually talks about in the book the church he grew up in. He loved it. It was special to him. It was important to him. But it gave him some views on women that he needed to deconstruct later on in life. And he talks about like how I think all of us really need like a theological or belief deconstruction at some point, because like you said, like, we make things that aren't like the core beliefs of Christianity and the core beliefs of following Jesus. We make them out to be something and we put them in this spot where they shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And deconstructing them and reconstructing helps put those things in their proper place, and having a faith that's based on the core beliefs.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Another thing that happens, so we kind of talked about the situational, dealing with wounds and dealing with false self. But a lot of times people all just hit a wall in their faith.
Oh, yeah.
You just aren't feeling and experiencing God the way you used to. Some people call this a dark night of the soul.
Okay.
Or there's periods of consolation when things are really good and great, and there's periods of desolation where, if you read the Psalms, you just feel like, oh, I'm laid low,
right?
And darkness is my only companion, and not to make light of that. That's a very real experience.
Yeah, absolutely, 100% is.
And a lot of times we hit this wall. God's not there like he used to be. God's out of the box.
Yeah.
And we feel like he's not there.
Yeah.
We feel like God's hiding. And, I think I thought of this example of if there's a drought and there's water, but it's just way down, a tree's going to grow its roots deeper to get to the water.
To find it.
And I think that is kind of, a good illustration for the wilderness, because sometimes we're just not feeling God. We're not experiencing him. We feel like he's hiding from us. And if we are able to connect to the source and dig deeper and build a faith that's deeper, we're more rooted than we've ever been in our faith. Yeah,
for sure. It is important to, like you talk about with being able to, a plant shooting its roots down deep. Yeah, that's, and we want to do that, and we want to encourage that in each other. That's, again, why a community is so important. You go through times like this. I'm not asking or telling anybody that they need to spill their guts with every person that they come in contact with. In fact, I would encourage you not to do that. But it's so important that you find at least one or two other people that you can really walk through these types of wilderness experiences with, that you can count on. That they'll encourage you, but that they'll challenge you. You can be real with them. You can tell them exactly what's going on, and they're not going to be like, oh, I can't believe you said that. You're such a horrible person, right?
Yeah.
You got to have somebody in your life that you can do that with.
Yeah, and really like deconstruction in this sense. And you obviously deconstruct with community, right?
Right.
Is really what you were saying just now. But
right.
You're deconstructing how you've always experienced God. And when you begin to reconstruct, you're reconstructing and you're learning how to experience God in new ways. You're learning how to experience God in deeper ways. And that's just going to lead to people thriving.
Right. Yeah. It really is. It's, one of the interesting things, right? We talked last week a lot more about the idea of God being in the box and how the wilderness sort of lets God out of the box. And I was just thinking, it's understandable, right? Even with the best of intentions, sometimes we put God into a box because at least that way we know where he is, right?
Yeah.
At least that way it's like, I know where to find him. And you go through a wilderness and he's let out of the box. That is a good thing, but initially it might seem like, well, I'm not sure I know where to find him because he's not in the place that I expected to find him, right? I'm not experiencing the same way I always used to, and so now I'm not sure where to find him. It's understandable that you would go through a feeling like that, and it's also understandable that you would be tempted to cram him back into a box.
Yeah, definitely.
But one, he just doesn't fit, and two, he doesn't belong there.
Yeah. And, people who've gone through periods of extended wilderness or, you're in the wilderness and you're just feeling really depressed, God out of the box is a good thing.
It's a good thing. It really is.
He's there for you. He loves you. He cares for you. You may feel like he's not there, but he is.
Yeah. Right.
And he's working, even though you feel like he's not. And so much of this conversation just reminds me of the Psalms.
Yeah.
And if you read through the Psalms, there's just deep emotion. I mean, the wilderness is a very emotional stage in your faith. And when these people are feeling these deep emotions, like go read Psalm 88. Like, if you're depressed, you'll identify this. If you want to know what it feels like to be depressed, read Psalm 88.
Yes.
But these people are still crying out to God.
They are.
And they're really brutally honest about it.
Yeah. And
I think for us to be able to get through the wilderness and be able to reconstruct our faith, we need to have some really brutally honest conversations with God.
Right. And I think, maybe, and this might be a way to kind of wrap things up with a little bit of encouragement, is one of the beautiful things about reading something like Psalm 88 or other parts of Scripture, right? David all throughout in different parts of the Psalms, Lamentations, you've got a lot of different areas, the book of Job, where people are being just raw and honest with God, is to recognize and understand this is a common experience. One of the things we don't want to run away from talking about the wilderness is because literally every person experiences them. Yeah. And so you are not alone in these wilderness experiences. At the bare minimum, you can go to Scripture and find a number of characters, real life people who have experienced and written about their wilderness experiences. And I guarantee you, the person next to you who you think has it all figured out has lived and maybe is currently living a wilderness. You're not alone. That's why I think so much of this, it's important to do this in the context of community. Yeah. Because other people have experienced what you're going through, or maybe completely different things, but they've been in a place where they've felt this way about their relationship with the Lord.
Yeah. And if you find yourself in this place, or maybe you listen to this, this week, but, 2 years down the line, you just get hit with a really just tough circumstance and you find yourself in a wilderness, hear us say two things. You're not alone.
Yep.
And find a guide. Find some community.
Yeah.
Go to a few trusted friends. You start counseling or therapy. We have mentoring here at Faircreek. Maybe you do Thrive and you do some marriage mentoring. Maybe you do Renew. Yes. But maybe you go to CR if you've had some unhealthy habits.
Right. Yeah. Celebrate Recovery.
Yeah. But you're not alone, and find a guide.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important. And we're here for you. We want to be a part of that if we can be. We would love to engage in a conversation with you and be that guide, or point you in the direction of that guide in any way that we can be a help and a benefit.
Yeah. And if you need help, if you're here right now, if you're here, a couple years down the road, email info@faircreek.org. Yeah. And just let us know you're in a wilderness and that you want to talk to someone, and we're there for you.
Yeah. Yeah, and join us online. You can always watch the services.
On the campus.
Yeah, and we are in the middle now of a new series. We would love for you to join us for What Happy Couples Know. It's all about relationship. So yeah, 9:30 and 11, and share this info with a friend, Grayson.
Yeah, we'll see y'all later.
Yeah, thank you so much.